Good morning. This is Bobby Albano, and we're here once again for our Wednesday Level Up training. Today, we're going to be talking about the residential listing agreement. That's one of our main or primary agreements that we, as real estate professionals, are going to use to contract with our clients. The residential listing agreement is to be used when you're representing a seller, and the sometimes it's referred to as your employment contract because it does list the terms and the amounts and the dates which you will receive compensation for doing this job for this individual. So, one of the primary forms that you're going to be using, and it's good to be familiar with this document. There are a lot of little, it's not a long document. However, there's a lot of little clauses in there that you want to be comfortable with explaining to your client, because this is probably when you present this to your client, this is probably the maybe fourth time that you've met with your client. So you're still in that rapport building phase, or you maybe not. Maybe it's a family member and it's really easy, but they're still going to have questions. They're going to say, well, what does that mean? And you're going to want to feel comfortable explaining what that means. So we're going to go through the form, and hopefully we'll answer all your questions as we go through it. And so you'll feel comfortable explaining it to your client. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with y'all. Let's go ahead and share, and we're going to go to the form itself so that you can see it. Okay, there we go. Now, this is one of those instances where we're going to have a form packet. We've talked about that before in zip forms. When you add a form to your zip forms folder for that transaction, the form is not alone. It comes with other forms, and those are the forms that you'll need to use with the residential listing agreement. So first of all, and these are the reason they're included is because there's some sort of reference to the form, or because there is a statutory reason. So there's a law stating that certain disclosures must be made in a certain order. So in the case of the residential listing agreement, you need to have the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship made prior to the filling out the listing agreement. And as far as the timing goes, when these disclosures need to be made, I'm not going to go into that today. We're just going to talk about the forms, but there are very specific timing rules when these disclosures need to be made. So we can go over that at another time. All right, so I've got some information in here that was from before, so we'll go ahead and remove that. This is from my test or my training zip forms. So I just have some old information in there. Anyway, so this is the agency, the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship. If the form is in the packet, then go ahead and complete that form, because there's a reason for that. And then we have our fair housing and discrimination advisory in this packet. Remove that too. Possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, disclosure and consent. And we'll go over these other forms at another time. Today, we're just going to focus on the RLA. Then we have the wire fraud and electronic funds transfer advisory. I'll just leave that one in there. And then we have our residential listing agreement. Okay, so we've talked about this before. We start with the date prepared. Now, the date prepared line is where you put the actual date that you're preparing it. And the reason for this date is there's no timeline associated with it. You know, sometimes like when the agreement is fully executed, that's a date that creates a timeline. A clock starts ticking at that time. The date prepared is simply for identification purposes. So let's say you created a residential listing agreement, you had an appointment, the date prepared was the date that you prepared it, and that appointment got pushed. But in the time that your appointment was supposed to be and the reschedule, let's say your client had a change that he wanted to make. So you're going to recreate the residential listing form with a new date that you created the new one. So therefore, you can tell the two apart by the date prepared. So it's a document identifier, kind of like a serial number for that contract. So that is the purpose for that. All right, I'm just getting rid of these. Anyway, so we'll start there. We put in the date prepared. Bear with me just 1 second. I'm getting to, okay, here we go. All right. All right. So the next one, the exclusive right to sell. Now, this is an exclusive authorization and right to sell. There are other listing agreements in zip forms that are available to you. The open listing, I can't think of off the top of my head the other ones that are available. But typically, we use the exclusive authorization and right to sell, which basically means doesn't matter who sells the property or who brings the buyer, you are still entitled to compensation. So this is the one that is most popular to use. The other ones aren't as common, and quite frankly, the general public probably doesn't have any idea they exist. They're used in specific situations, though. If you might want to offer to use an open listing for somebody who's not really wanting to list their property with one agent. They want to keep it open for whoever brings the buyer. So whoever does bring the buyer in an open listing, that's the person who's entitled to compensation. So you might want to use that in certain situations. But this is a good all-around use residential listing agreement. It's going to make sure that you are entitled to your commission no matter who brings the buyer. Okay, so then it goes on to exclusive right to sell. So the first line, you're going to put the seller. So that's the person that you're working with. You want to list the names of all sellers. In most situations, the sellers should be the owners of the subject property, the person who intends to sell the property, and the person with the authority to both list and sell the property. If more than one seller is an entity, such as a corporation, an LLC, or a trustee of a trust, then identify the entity seller, not the signing party for the entity. For example, if you're selling something for a couple that has created a trust or a living trust for themselves, you want to put the name of the trust on that line, not the individuals who are signing on behalf of the trust. Okay, just as a practice tip, before taking the listing, it's a good idea to obtain a property profile or check the public records for the subject property. You want to use this information to verify that the people that you're speaking with are actually the sellers. And there have been instances, and this has happened to me before, where somebody has shown me the property. They've talked about the listing price, the market. I mean, they acted as if they were the owners of the property. Then when it came down to signing the listing agreement, I checked the public record. Turns out that that was his brother's house. And so when I told him, look, I'm going to have your brother's signature on this listing agreement, the brother never appeared because he really didn't want to sell the property. So when you want to do your due diligence to make sure that who you're dealing with is actually the person who is authorized to sign on behalf of the property. Okay. So then the next one is hereby employs and grants. On this line, you're going to want to put the broker's name. You remember, we as salespersons, we don't have the ability to contract with anyone as far as selling real property. Only the broker can do that. And you are operating as an agent for the broker. So you're going to put the broker's name in there. Now, if the broker's name is like a company name, you'll use the company name. If it's an individual, you use the broker's name, actual name. Um, yeah, so if you're working for a company, let's say Century 21, you're going to put Century 21 on that line. If you're working for California Curb Appeal, then you're a very lucky person. Anyway, all right. Then it says beginning date and ending at 11:59 p.m. on date. Now, it's very, very important that you have a beginning date and an ending date. It is illegal for you to have someone sign a listing agreement that does not have an end date. This is very, very important, and you can get into very big trouble by doing something like this. And I've caught other agents in that. I've had people come to me and say, I'm stuck in this contract and I don't know how to get out. So I say, can you show me the listing agreement? And sure enough, the listing agreement has no end date. It's very tricky. So if I were you, I would not get in between an agent and their client, even if the client comes to you. That could be a very tricky space for you to operate in because you don't want to be doing anything that could appear to be unethical, like stealing a client away from another agent. So just because I gave that example is not not my endorsing doing something like that, but just to say that you must have an end date for your listing agreement. Now, I always pick the listing end date based on the property, the market, what I think is going to be the time needed to sell this property. So if you're looking at something that is on the higher end, it might take a little bit longer than if you're in if this property is one of the more popular. It's like a shoe store. Size 8 is always the first to go. And the same with homes. If you're in that sweet spot where everybody's looking for that price point, then you're going to need a shorter listing period. But what I always try and do is think about, okay, if we get into escrow and for some reason this falls out of escrow and we have to remarket the property, how long will that take? So I allow for one cancellation of the escrow and then the full 30, 45, whatever, 60 days it's going to take to close. So depending on the property, depending on the market, you want to choose a good amount of time. Now, I would not choose something that is really over a year, actually. I do allow a year for land and land only. Sometimes businesses, depending, even businesses, I don't like to go a year. A year is just a really long time. So you can always renew these listing agreements. You don't have to worry about what if it expires. You can just renew it. Sometimes that's a good opportunity to kind of take another look at the selling price. If you've had it for 9 months, why isn't it selling? If it's not a piece of obscure land in the middle of the desert, then that could indicate that there might be a problem with the price or the marketing or some other factor. Okay. All right. The listing period, the exclusive and irrevocable right to sell or exchange the real property described as. Now, this place where you put described as, this would be the the address of the property. Yes, it would be the address of the property. Situated in, then you put the city, the county, the zip code, and then the assessor's parcel number. Now, the only time you're not going to use the assessor's parcel number is when you're selling a business, because unless the business is tied to a real piece of property, then you're not going to have an assessor's parcel number. So you'd only leave that blank if you were dealing with a business. And in fact, if you're dealing with a business, you're not going to use a residential listing agreement. So therefore, you will always have the assessor's parcel number on this line. Okay, then there's two checkboxes. This property is a manufactured home. See manufactured home listing addendum. So the reason why this listing agreement has these little check boxes for this situation is because it's going to, when I check this box, it's going to automatically add this car addendum, the MHLA, to your folder for the documents for this transaction. So this is kind of a helpful tip, a helpful little tool that Zip Form provides for agents so that you don't forget or you don't miss putting this addendum on here. Because for a mobile home, you will use the residential listing agreement. You'll just have this addendum along with it. All right. Second checkbox, this property is being sold as part of probate, conservatorship, guardianship, or receivership. See probate listing addendum and advisory, car form PLA, additional terms. So this is also the same thing. If this is part of a probate, there's going to be an additional addendum that you have to have with your listing agreement. So once you check this box, Zip Forms is going to automatically add that form for you, just as a helpful little tool, which is wonderful. We pay for these things, but they give us good stuff for what we pay for. All right, the listing price. You want to you want to write out the list price in words and in parentheses after the dollar sign using numbers. So once you put the dollars in, I believe the words will automatically populate. So you'll just put the numbers in the after the dollar sign, and the words will automatically populate. The list price usually is the target price at which the seller is willing to sell the property. As with the listing period, determining the correct list price requires a careful balancing of various factors, including, among other things, the condition of the property, the party's requirements, for example, how quickly the seller wants to sell the property, the comps in the market, and our market conditions. If the list price is too low, the seller may get frustrated receiving a lot of offers that never amount to anything. But if the list price is too high, the seller may get no sales activity at all. So you want to be very careful on this listing price. Now, the trouble that we run into as agents is sometimes we'll show the seller the comparable sales in the neighborhood. We might even have a home that's exactly like this subject property, and it still doesn't convince the seller of what the best price to list is. So a lot of times they think there's something, and this is common, they think there's something special about their property that will call for a higher list price. And that's a difficult conversation to have, but really it's in your best interest to not allow that seller to push you into listing it higher than it should be. And one of the ways that you can kind of counteract that is you can say, okay, you can agree, we'll go ahead and list for this price. If we don't get any activity in 2 weeks, then we'll go ahead and adjust the price to this list price. And that can be the price that your comparables are indicating the price should be. So that's one way you can handle that. Another way is, I guess that's really, the other way is just to show the seller, look, and quite honestly, there are agents that will uh, say, okay, I'll sell it for you at this price and get the listing, but then they won't be able to do that because it's not the agent that determines the price. It's not the seller that determines the price. It's the market that determines the price. So if a seller is just not willing to sell at an appropriate price, you might be better off letting that listing go to an agent who is promising that, because that is a very difficult situation once you're in it, to try and convince the seller that there's no way that that price is going to materialize. It's just going to cause a lot of bad feelings, and you're going to end up not being able to sell the home in any way. So, a lot of times it's better to cut your losses right at the beginning. If that seller is so determined to get a price that's not possible, then let them go with somebody who is promising to sell for that price. Let them have that headache. It's not worth it. Trust me. All right. Then we go to B, listing terms. This section can contain any additional terms of the sale. Just as a side note, the terms of the sale are set forth here primarily to help the listing agent advertise and market the property. For a subsequent sale, be sure to reiterate the items to be included and excluded, and any additional terms of the sale and the sales contract between the seller and buyer. So, let's say the seller did say, I really want to try for this price here. Let's try it for 2 weeks. We'll go with what you say. We'll try it for 2 weeks and then we'll adjust the price to this price. That's where you can put that. You can put that in the listing terms in 2B. Just write it out exactly the way you want to say it. Listing terms, list price shall be this price until this date. If no offers are received, then price shall be adjusted to this price. So just very simple put, and that way, then you're showing the seller, look, I'm going to try it at your price. If we don't, if we get an offer, great, wonderful. But if we don't, then they'll agree to do it your way. So it's a kind of it's a good way to go if you just have somebody who's just really set on asking for a higher price. All right, then we come to the good part, compensation to broker. The compensation to broker paragraph contains the terms and conditions of the broker's compensation. The notice provision should be set forth in not less than 10-point bold-faced type on any printed or standard form agreement establishing or altering a listing agent's right to compensation in the sale of a 1 to 4 residential units. So when you're using the form in zip forms, you really don't have like a font choice. It's gonna just give you what the font is already set up to do. But if you are trying to be, sneaky, or if an agent is trying to, oh, let's make it really really tiny so maybe the client won't see it or whatever, that's just never a good practice. Because once it's seen, then your cover's blown right there. And we're in a relationship business. If you destroy relationships as part of your business plan, well, you're not going to go very far. That your business is not going to flourish. Um, it's really important to be good to people. I just can't even express that enough. It's just really important. So you're going to put here, the seller agrees to pay broker as compensation for services, irrespective of agency relationships, either, so you can use a percentage amount, which is very common to put in, anywhere from 4 to 6%, depending on the property sales price. Now, this is not um, given by any sort of law or regulation, anything like that. So this is completely negotiable. And this has been the subject of this court case between the NAR and some other folks. So you want to make sure that your client knows that this is a negotiated price, and it's up to you as the listing agent to say, look, I can do this for this price. Because you're experienced, because you know how many hours this is going to take you, because you know the market, because you know these things, you're going to be able to let that seller know what your price is. And that is your price. Make sure that your broker is in agreement with the price that you're asking. Your broker might have different requirements, but that is your price. I have asked 19% before, because based on the sales price and based on the amount of work and the amount of hours I was going to be spending on the transaction, that is what I needed to get in order for this to be worth my time. Otherwise, I'm working for free. So that is what you will take into consideration when you're asking for your price. Now, okay, sorry about that. So, in most cases, for a standard sale, just calculate out what each different percentage will be. And then from there, you take into account what expenses you're going to have and how many hours you're going to be working. And then calculate that as a percentage. That's what I would say to do. All right. Either the percentage of the listing price, or if a purchase agreement is entered into, of the purchase price. So this contract kind of sets forth, if your list price is different from the actual sales price, you're going to go with the sales price. That's going to be your final basis of that percentage point, or a flat fee. So you can also charge a flat fee, and then it allows you to add things to that. And a lot of times agents will ask the seller to pay for their transaction coordinator or the photography, depending on how great or how inexpensive of a photo package the client wants. So, it gives you some flexibility there. But please, I I really want you to understand that you don't want to rush through this. You want to put some thought into it, and don't think of everything as a windfall. We've gotten to an age and a place where we have to be thoughtful about what we're charging people. That we've always said that the sellers of the smaller properties are subsidized by the sellers of the larger properties. Well, that's a decision that you as an agent need to make for yourself, and design your pricing structure in a way that makes sense, so that you can explain it to your clients, because they're going to ask. They're going to want to know, well, what made you get to this point? What made you choose this rate? So I urge you, please put some thought into it and come up with a pricing structure for yourself that makes sense. Okay. This could also be a way for you to market yourself. If you have something that you're doing that's different from other agents, then use that as a marketing um, point, you know. Okay. The broker's commission can be expressed as, oh, I just talked about that. Sorry. All right. All right. So now we get to one. It says if during the listing period or any extension, the broker, cooperating broker, seller, or any other person procures a ready, willing, and able buyer whose offer to purchase the property on any price and terms is accepted by seller, provided the buyer completes the transaction or is prevented so by the seller, broker is entitled to compensation whether any escrow resulting from such offer closes during or after the expiration period of the listing period or any extension. So, by entering into this listing agreement, the seller's agreeing to uh, compensating the broker as long as anyone procures a ready, willing, and able buyer during the listing period. The seller accepts the offer and the transaction closes. It doesn't make any difference if the procuring cause is the broker, the seller, a cooperating broker, a neighbor, anyone else, or no one at all. Sometimes the seller won't be willing to compensate the broker for a buyer procured by the seller. In that situation, the seller reserves the right to sell the property without paying the broker, and the proper listing agreement to use is the residential listing agreement seller reserved. So that's a completely different listing agreement. If the seller refuses to compensate the broker for a buyer procured by anyone other than the broker, the proper listing agreement to use is the residential listing agreement open, non-exclusive authorization to right to sell. So if there are, I think I said this early on, if the seller wants anything other than the exclusive right to sell, which means anyone procuring who's the procuring cause of that property selling, then the broker's entitled to a commission. Um, this is the one we want to use. However, if you have a seller that says, look, I'll pay you a commission, it doesn't matter who brings the buyer except me. If I want to bring the buyer and maybe the seller's already talking to somebody, and the seller says, "Well, if he doesn't buy, then you can sell it. I'll sign a listing agreement with you." Then you'd want to use the seller reserved listing agreement, because that's saying if your buyer that you've got on the line, maybe it's a tenant. Sometimes sellers sell to the tenant that's currently in the property. So you want to use that listing agreement so that you can get that signed. You can let the seller try and get that sale done. If he's not successful, then you will list the property and earn a commission through the procurement of a buyer, no matter who procures the buyer, except for if it's the seller. And then the open listing, I think we discussed that before. So you'll use this listing agreement for any situation other than those two. All right. It says, okay, so that's number one. And then it says, or number two, if within blank calendar days after the end of the listing period or any extension, or after any cancellation of this agreement, I'm sorry, you can read it yourself, but basically this sub paragraph is the safe harbor provision. To avoid paying the broker's compensation, a seller may be tempted to reject an offer from a buyer procured by the broker, only to sell the subject property to that same buyer after the listing period ends. This safe harbor provision reduces the possibility of this type of abuse by protecting the broker's compensation for a certain number of days after the listing period ends. So you would determine how many calendar days after the end of this listing period that you want to be earning a compensation after the listing agreement ends. So, a common number of days is 30 or 60 or something like that. You don't want to make it too long because that kind of looks funny, but 30 or 60 days, if a buyer is procured and it was somebody that you showed the property to, then you would still be entitled to commission. Okay, and then or three, if without broker's prior consent, the property is withdrawn from sale, conveyed, leased, rented, or otherwise transferred or made unmarketable by a voluntary act of the seller during the listing period or any extension. So what it's saying here is that the broker's entitled to full compensation if without the broker's consent, the seller withdraws the property from sale, transfers the property, or renders the property unmarketable. Okay, so if they're trying to get out of the listing agreement and they do any one of those things, then you're still entitled to compensation. All right, so we're gonna go a little bit faster here so that we can get through this entire, you know what, we're not gonna be able to get through the entire thing. So we'll go ahead and finish page 1, and then next week we will start back with page 2. Okay, I think it's better than trying to rush through anyway. All right, so B, if completion of the sale is prevented by a party to the transaction other than the seller, then compensation which otherwise would have been earned under paragraph 3A shall be payable only if and when the seller collects damages by suit, arbitration, settlement, or otherwise, and then in an amount equal to the lesser of 1/2 of the damages recovered or the above compensation, after first deducting title and escrow expenses and the expenses of collection, if any. So what this is saying is that if the sale falls through, and it's at no fault of the seller, the broker's compensation is limited to 1/2 of whatever the seller collects as money damages. And it can't exceed the agreed upon commission plus the administrative or transaction fee. So an example of that would be if I'm trying to think of a situation. So not the buyer. I guess if maybe the buyer backs out and the seller has to sue for damages, maybe that's a situation. In any case, number C, it says, in addition, seller agrees to pay broker. This is where you can put any other costs to be paid by the seller that could include MLS fees, special advertising fees, or other costs for marketing the property. If there are no other costs to the seller, you want to insert non-applicable or NA to emphasize the fact that there are no additional fees. Okay. D, seller has been advised of broker's policy regarding cooperation with and the amount of compensation offered to other brokers. Broker is authorized to cooperate with and compensate brokers participating through the multiple listing service by offering to MLS brokers out of brokers' compensation specified in paragraph 3A, either a percentage or a flat fee. So what this is saying is that the broker should specify the rate or amount of compensation for any cooperating broker or the buyer, the agent who brought the buyer to the transaction. So you want to indicate what this is going to be on the listing agreement. A lot of times, I know early on I refrained from putting in the percentage because I wanted to retain that decision based upon, am I going to, maybe I'll try and use the some of the compensation as an incentive or something like that. Or maybe if there are unexpected costs that come up, maybe I want to reserve some of that for that purpose. But the right way to do this is to indicate this right up front. So if you're charging the seller 6% of the selling price as commission, then you want to show what are you paying the agent that brought the buyer. Are you going to pay them half? Are you going to pay them a portion? Are you going to pay them a flat fee? And this is the amount that's going to go into the MLS when you advertise the property in the MLS. So, yeah, it's as simple as that. All right. And then D2, broker is authorized to cooperate and compensate brokers outside the MLS as per broker's policy. So if the buyer's agent is an agent from out of the area and they are out of your MLS area, then you're going to cooperate with them based on the policy that you have with your broker or your broker's policy. So you want to check on that. Okay, E, seller hereby irrevocably assigns to broker the above compensation from seller's funds and proceeds in escrow. Broker may submit this agreement as instructions to compensate broker pursuant to paragraph 3A to any escrow regarding the property involving seller and a buyer, prospective buyer, or other transferee. So when you open escrow, your escrow officer is going to ask you what is the commission that's been agreed to. You can simply send a copy of this listing agreement, and that will give them the information that they need to know. This provision entitles the broker to receive his or her compensation through escrow, thereby avoiding any problems of collecting such funds from the seller directly. Also, the irrevocable assignment language means that the seller agrees not to revoke, cancel, or put a hold on any put on hold any instruction to escrow to pay such compensation to the broker at the close of escrow. So this clause is what protects you from the seller saying, you know what, I changed my mind. Escrow, please do not pay them that compensation. This clause protects against that. Maybe they got mad at you. Maybe, they weren't happy with the services. That they still can't just stop escrow from paying the commission. Okay. F, number 1, seller represents that seller has not previously entered into a listing agreement with another broker regarding the property unless specified as follows. So there are times when you're going to run into a client that says, look, I just canceled an agreement with another agent. I want to give this a try again, but I want to do it with a different broker, a different agent. In those cases, it's fine to do as long as they're not under contract currently, but you do need to disclose it here on the listing agreement. So you're just going to write in the person's or the broker's name. You don't need to write in an agent's name, just need to write the broker's name. And then 2, seller warrants that the seller has no obligation to pay compensation to any other broker regarding the property unless the property is transferred to any of the following individuals or entities. So depending on the listing agreement that the seller was under previously, there might be an individual that if that individual purchased the property, another agent is entitled to the commission. You want to list those individuals here. And you're going to get that information from the seller. The seller's going to know what the terms are with the previous broker, and if there are any things that we need to know going forward. And then number three, if the property is sold to anyone listed above during the time the seller is obligated to compensate another broker is not entitled to compensation under this agreement, and broker is not obligated to represent seller in such transaction. So just to summarize all of this, the seller will need to identify any prior listing agents, and list the names of the prospective buyers procured by that agent, even if a listing period has ended. A seller who had a listing agreement with another broker, will not want to enter into a new listing agreement with the second broker during the first broker's safe harbor period. Remember the safety clause, you don't want to sign a listing agreement with a client who's still under that safety clause time period. Otherwise, the seller is going to risk being obligated to pay full commission to both brokers if a buyer procured by the first broker buys the property during both the first broker's safety period and the second broker's listing period. So it's really not harmful to you as a broker, but it's going to be harmful to your seller, and the seller's not going to appreciate you not telling him that. So to avoid this result, subparagraph 3F allows the seller to exclude prospective buyers procured by the first broker from the second broker's listing agreement. So the second broker will not receive any compensation if anyone on that list buys the property. So as just a little tip, a prudent listing agent in the second broker's position will carefully review the terms of the seller's listing agreement with the first broker and verify that the first broker's list of prospective buyers has been timely and properly submitted to the seller. Also, if the first broker's safety period ends before the second broker's listing period ends, the second broker may want the exclusion to terminate when the first broker's safety clause period ends. For example, the second broker takes a listing from January 1 to April 30th, but the first broker's safety period for certain buyers ends March 31st. The second broker may want to exclude these buyers until March 31st only, and not for the full duration of the second broker's listing period to April 30th. So I hope that made sense. You just want to look at those time periods and make sure there's no overlap. And if there is overlap, who are those buyers that it would apply to? And make sure that when you write this out, it's clear. Everybody understands. All right, we're going to go ahead and end it there. Thank you so much for joining me. I have enjoyed this immensely, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. There we go. So next Wednesday, beginning at 10 o'clock, we're going to start on page 2 of the residential listing agreement, and we'll go through that page. This may take us a few weeks, but that's okay. I'll go ahead and list these as part A, B, C, D, etc., so that when you go back later, you know that it's a series. Okay? All right. Well, have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.